Well, good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well today. And it's a beautiful day outside. As I'm recording this one, this is Saturday, but anyway, it just snowed last night and 70 degrees a few days earlier than that. Now it snowed. So, welcome to Colorado. On my desk, there's a little book entitled 1000 Senior Moments, given to me by one of my sons for Christmas. And just what I needed, really. However, what I haven't told him is that many of those 1,000 moments of senior apply to me, sadly. So please don't tell him that actually was relevant in my life. But many of the ways around forgetting issues seems to be that I seem to have in my senior moments. So thinking that I'm not alone, let's talk about that. And if it doesn't apply to you directly because you have a fabulous memory, whatever it may be, maybe it's someone sitting next to you right now or someone you know that you can share this with them. The title of our lesson is called Don't Forget to Remember. There's a story about a friend who was visiting his friends who owned a farm, and they were getting along in age, and he went out to visit them. So they're on a farm, and the farmer gave a whistle, and his dog herded the cattle into the corral, then latched the gate with his paw. Wow, that's some dog. What's her name? Well, the forgetful farmer thought for a moment and then asked, what do you call that red flower that smells really good and has thorns on the stem? A rose? Ah, that's it. The farmer turned to his wife. Hey, Rose, what's the name of our dog? I love that joke. Anyway, don't forget to remember. Forgetting in our day is a day by life annoyance in our life many times. As we get older, a little frightening, maybe at some degrees. I know in my life, I go into a room, I have a thought says, well, I need to go do that. And I go into the room and I stand there because my mind's already thinking about two other things. And I go, now, why did I come up here? Or why did I go in there? Or I say to myself, I'm going to go buy something from the grocery store. I'm going to put that down the list. And then I get to the list eventually and I go, now, what was it I was going to buy? Those moments are so annoying sometimes. And when they increase in time and numbers, it gets kind of scary a little bit. But our memories many times aren't as reliable as we may think. But what level of forgetting is normal? Is it okay to mix up the names of countries as our current president is doing possibly? Well, let's look at the evidence a little bit. Let's think that our brains are like a computer in some ways. When we remember something, our brain that needs to learn is called encoding. When we keep it safe, it's called storage. And when we recover it, when you want to use it, when we need it, it's called retrieving. So forgetting can occur at any point in that three steps of us trying to have something put into our brain. So when sensory information first comes into the brain, we can't process it all. There's so much coming at us. I mean, that's a lot of information in a short period of time that just in this fast paced world that we just can't retain that quickly, no matter who we are. So we instead use our attention to filter the information so that what's important can be identified and then processed. That process means that when we are encoding our experiences, we're mostly encoding the things that we're paying attention to, that we're focusing in on. Now, let's say if someone introduces themselves at a social gathering, they're at the church or wherever it may be, at the same time that we're paying close attention to something else. Well, we never encode their name. It's a failure of memory or forgetting. But it's entirely normal and very common for everybody to do that because there's so much coming at you, you just do not select the right things to remember. For example, habits and structures such as always putting our keys in the same place so we don't encode where they're located because it's just a habit. That can help us get around this problem. Now, I know that car keys are normally at the bottom of my wife's purse, but she can't remember where she put her purse. So there's always a glitch in the system no matter what we do. Now, this needs a rehearsal that can help us in this situation. But it cannot stop forgetting, but it can help us. When we go to a supermarket, we might encode where we parked the car, right there by that lamppost at N2, whatever it may be, some number. But when we enter the shop, we're going to the store, we're busy rehearsing other things that we need to remember. For example, our shopping list. And as a result, we may forget the location of the car. Then comes the wandering around and hitting the remote horn button on our key ring. And then just about time we wonder if it's ever going to happen, we say, oh, there it is at last. I finally see it. And oh, yeah, that's where I had it all along. I remember now. However, this shows us another feature of forgetting. We can forget specific information, but we can remember the gist of it, the idea of it. Now, some help would be when we walk out of the shop, we realize that we don't remember where we parked our car. We can probably remember whether it was to the left or right in the parking lot of the shop store, or on the edges of the car parking, or towards the center of it. We get the idea of where it is. So rather than having to walk around the entire park to find it, we can search a relatively defined area that kind of gets us the idea that it's got to be right here. I remember that. Now, where I mess up sometimes is that I get that time mixed up with another time where my car was somewhere else. I get mixed up in those two. That happens occasionally. So let's talk about aging here a little bit and forgetting, which is really where we are, is it not? A couple was going on vacation, standing in line to check in their bags at the airline counter. The husband said to the wife, I wish we had remembered to have brought the piano. And the wife said, why? We've got 16 bags here already. And he said, yeah, I know, but the tickets are on the piano. As people get older, they worry about their memory more. It's true that our forgetting becomes more pronounced, and that doesn't always mean there's a problem. It just means that's part of normal life. My dad used to say, when I come home to visit, that with his half a brain and my mom's half a brain, they had one full brain to remember things and help each other out. And it was so true. It has gone to my life as well. The longer we live, the more experiences we have, and the more we have to remember. But not only that, the experiences have much in common, meaning that it becomes tricky to separate those experiences and separate them out in distinct memories in our brain. It is just a flood of information coming at us. So not necessarily age, but it has to do with the multiplicity of experiences of our life to this age, to where we are today, that it becomes somewhat a big pot of soup, if you will, and we can't quite distinct flavors in it. I love that skit in the Andy Griffith Show when Andy and Aunt Bee are talking about Opie's schoolwork that he's not doing too well on. And Andy says, they sure are requiring for kids to learn history at such an early age. And Aunt Bee gives a great statement. Well, there's a lot more history to remember now. Boy, isn't that true? If you'd only experienced a family holiday trip to a family's home, let's say that your I don't know, a nephew, aunt, your son and daughter, whatever it may be, or there's a reunion possibly to a lakeside home that you all have rented, where it may be, you'll remember that with great clarity. However, if you've been on family gatherings in different cities at different times and different locations, then remembering whether something happened on this holiday or whether it was on the other holiday when you went to Denver, or the second one when your siblings or a family where it may came on holiday to Denver or to Colorado Springs, it becomes more challenging. Exactly what year did that happen? And did we go there? Did so-and-so come at that time 5 years ago? It becomes mixed up because it has a lot of similarities to it. Now let's think about that computer brain of ours. And we'll get to the lesson. We're getting to it because you'll understand now when we get to the spiritual aspect of all this. In our computer brain, overlap between memories or interference gets in the way of receiving more information. Now imagine filing documents in your computer. As you start the process, you have a clear filing system where you can easily place each document into the right kind of folder so you know where to find it. I love saving different kind of hard copy documents at work in my file system right there in my desk drawer. I know I need to be more contemporary, but I like to have that piece of paper, in some cases, to look at it and ponder it. However, whether it's in the folder on my desk or an electron folder on my computer, the same question arises when I'm looking for a copy of that document. Now, where did I put that so I would not forget where it is? So forgetting things in common, and as we get older, it becomes more common. But forgetting names or dates, as President Biden does sometimes, doesn't necessarily impair decision making. So older people can have a deep knowledge and a good intuition, which can help counteract the memory lapses sometimes. There once was a husband who was in big trouble for forgetting his wife's birthday. So his wife told him, okay, in a very stern voice, tomorrow there will be something in the driveway for me that goes from 0 to 200 in 2 seconds flat. You know what I want. Well, the next morning, the wife found a small package in the driveway. She opened it up to find a brand new set of scales. The husband's funeral will be next Saturday. It's so easy to forget. It happened often to God's people. In the book of Judges, there is a cycle that is repeated many times. Forgetting God, calamity, remembering God, deliverance, and forgetting God again. It's a cycle. Our scripture lesson is from Psalms 106, starting at verse 7 all the way to 25. But I'm not going to read all of that to you. Just pick out parts of that, but read it on your own if you would. It starts with verse 7. Our ancestors in Egypt failed to appreciate your miraculous deeds. They failed to remember your many acts of loyal love, and they rebelled at the sea, by the Red Sea. Yet he delivered them for the sake of his reputation, that he might reveal his power. The psalmist goes on the remembering of what has been done in the deliverance from Egypt and all the miracles that God had performed in helping them. And the psalmist describes for us what has happened to the children of Israel and the sin they committed in forgetting God. But before we are too hard on them, though, we should take careful examination of our own lives as well. Have we ever been guilty of forgetting what God has done for us? Now, usually we forget God after a tremendous blessing. Do you want to know when we forget about God the most? It's when life challenges again and again to us, and it is overwhelming us. Then in desperation, we remember God. Here are 3 things I want to share with you today as the very heart of our lesson today. Not to forget in our spiritual life that the psalmist's lesson teaches us. 3 critical things not to forget. The first thing not to forget is don't forget to remember God's power. How much power he has and how much he can flex that power to do whatever he needs to do in working in this world. It says in verse 7, our fathers understood not thy wonders in Egypt. They saw what God did for them in Egypt. They saw the miraculous plagues that came in that prevailed against Pharaoh, and Pharaoh allowed them to leave. These were not only the destruction of their enemies and for their deliverance from them, but they were also proofs of the power of God and his being the only one and true God that they could rely on, in opposition to the idols of Egyptians, and that he only ought to worship and trust in. He was showing them who really is in control. Now, they also said they remembered not the multitude of his mercies. When you don't understand the lessons that God has done for you, then it will be forgotten, the Psalm says. That is why you're listening in today. You are seeking to better understand and not forget all what God has done. You're trying to remember. You want to apply that to your life. And the other aspect of the verse talks about, but provoked him at the sea, even at the Red Sea. Now, Israel is hardly out of Egypt, and yet she begins to provoke the Lord by doubting his power to deliver. They provoked him by their language to Moses. It says in 14:11 of Exodus, because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? They're picking at God. Many Christians go through the same pattern. They're freed from the bondage of Egypt, like salvation. That's a salvation experience. And they expect everything to be perfect in their lives, but all we have is a cross to bear, and we all come up against Red Seas, and then another Red Sea. And we know in our faith journey that there will be a Red Sea continually in this life, over and over again. We even think that because of our age, we suffered enough and God should give us a break. It should be a small stream, not a big sea in front of us. We paid our price, but that is not true. Here's the second thing that we don't want to forget. Remembering God's provision. It says in verses 12 to 14. So God asked, do you remember the manna I gave you daily to sustain you? Do you remember the water I poured out from a rock on the ground? Do you remember how your clothes and shoes never wore out in 40 years that you were in the wilderness? Don't you remember the provisions I gave you? Ever been there before in your life? I know it has in my life. God saw all of us through hard times. He performed a literal miracle in our lives. But you find yourself sometimes when the going gets tough, you begin to forget all that God had done for you, had provided for you. And we forget about that. Now here's the third thing, and the last one we don't need to forget. To remember God's promise. It says in verse 24, they believed not his word, it says there. In Deuteronomy, it goes in and says, he brought us out from thence, that he might bring us in to give us the land which he swore unto our fathers. A promise of God. Now Moses knew a little of what lay ahead for these people. He knew there would be days of discouragement, and when they wandered about in a world, what was happening to them. Why are they doing this? So he wanted them to remember what God has done for them. Now that is so key to our lives. Sometimes we wonder, has God forgotten about us? Or we wonder, why is God allowing this to happen? Or is God really listening to me? Is God caring about me? And that is what this all is about, that what Moses is projecting with the Israelites. Don't forget to remember. Don't forget to remember all the things he's done for you, that he's kept his provisions for you. He's used his power for you. And now he is being able to fulfill the promises he told that he was going to do. But they wouldn't listen, like I sometimes don't. Not only did they forget the works of God, but they forgot God, who did those mighty works, when they said of the molten image, these are my gods, O Israel. So which brought you out of the land of Egypt. They forgot that it was God who was leading them, guiding them, and promised them a land of milk and honey. What can we learn from that? Ever seen a fidgety kid in church? Can't sit still, constantly moving, probably like you are now, listening to me in this lesson. You're fidgeting and wondering when I'll get to the point and get that second cup of coffee that you want to go or have, or you want to go to lunch because you're hungry. But many of us are restless today, like that child who has such a difficult time sitting still during church on a sleepy Sunday morning. One of our greatest challenges is sitting still, waiting on God's will and fulfillment of his promises. We are distracted by more exciting things, and we continually wish we were somewhere else doing something else. And despite our steadfast faith in God and our confidence that he has our lives in his hands, we become more and more restless, wondering when these promises will ever come to pass, worrying and analyzing, doubting our choices, questioning whether or not that we're in God's will. All this prevails against us when we just got to sit still and listen to it. So, there you are. To remind us to not forget to remember. We need to don't forget to remember God's power. We don't forget to remember God's provision. And we don't forget to remember God's promises. I heard this blessing one time. Blessed are those who give without remembering, and blessed are those who take without forgetting. I like that, don't you? Let me share this last story, and we'll come to an end of our lesson today. There's a very mature couple who were having trouble remembering things, so they decided to go to their doctor to make sure nothing was wrong with them. When they arrived at the doctor's office, they explained to the doctor the problem they were having. So after checking the couple out, the doctor told them, says that they were physically okay, but they might want to start writing things down, making notes to help them remember things. Well, the couple thanked the doctor and they went back home. Well, later that night, while watching TV, the old man got up from the chair and asked his wife, and she said, "Where are you going?" He said, "Well, I'm going to the kitchen." She said, "Will you give me a bowl of ice cream?" "Sure." And then the wife said, "Well, don't you think you should write that down so you can remember it?" "Oh, I can remember that," he said. "Well, I also like some strawberries on top. So you'd better write that down because I know you'll forget that," the woman said. "Oh, I can remember that," he said. "You want a bowl of ice cream with some strawberries on top." So she said, "Well, I also like some whipped cream on top of that. And I know you'll forget that, so you better write it down." With irritation in his voice, he said, "Look, I don't need to write it down. I can remember that." So he went to the kitchen. A little while later, about 20 minutes, he came back in from the kitchen and handed her a plate of bacon and eggs. She stared at the plate for a moment and said, "You forgot the toast." I love that story. But that just shows you about forgetfulness. I'll leave you with this last thought. It's a beautiful little excerpt I found in a book. I forget the name of the book, actually, but it's really pretty and puts a positive spin on what we're talking about here. Forget each kindness that you do as soon as you have done it. Forget the praise that falls to you the moment you have won it. Forget the slander that you hear before you can repeat it. Forget each slight, each spite, each sneer whenever you may need it. Remember every promise made and keep it to the letter. Remember those who lend you aid and be grateful debtor. Remember all the happiness that comes your way in living. Forget each worry and distress. Be hopeful and forgiving. Remember good. Remember truth. Remember heaven is above you. And you will find through age and youth that many will love you. Isn't that a great poem? That's a great way to end. So don't forget to remember. And don't forget to be thankful. May the Lord bless you this morning.